So I'll just dive right into questions. And the first one is, at the 1994 4S conference in New Orleans, you gave a talk called Never Modern, Never Been, Never Ever, Some Thoughts About Never Never Land in Science Studies, which is a fabulous title. And some of that has been lost to history, but can you tell us a little bit about the paper?
Well, I tried to reconstruct the paper. I actually wrote that one, which is unusual for me. But I think that there were some demons of revenge because it's disappeared from all of my files. But I do remember that it was a kind of engaged friendship with Bruno Latour in particular, and his very generative little book, We Have Never Been Modern, which I, as well as many other people, learned a great deal from. And Bruno had become both a friend and a colleague and a kind of not a frenemy exactly, but a person to tussle with. A person I love dearly, and I think, we both really value, I know, we both really treasured each other's friendship, and it was very warm and very affectionate. And also intellectually, kind of some very interesting frictions between us. And that this paper was my, never thoughts about Never Never Land in Science Studies. Basically said, yes, that this is for a long time now, you have been completely thrown back to intersectional feminist theory, to feminist science studies, to non-West thinking, in spite of an occasional example in there in your writing. You continue to draw on particular kinds of European scholarly sources that emphasize a masculine individualist war as the fundamental trope, and you can't what you're setting out to do. You can't do the kind of modernity and the modern and propose what he now calls land on earth love, a kind of love of the earth, which I think Bruno was working toward very much in 1994. Achieve your practices and network-based thinking about knowledge making, including the sciences, unless you engage with the other social movements that are at the root of science, most certainly including intersectional feminist science studies. The kind that I think Tricia Hill Collins and myself and Sandra Harding and Evelyn Hammonds and Lee Starr and. I think that at that time in Bruno's work, it's not true now, there's some really big changes. At that time in Bruno's work, he systematically did not cite any of us. And people like Lee Starr and I and others were quite angry about the masculinism of it all. And and that paper was, I tend to work with laughter as my fundamental method. And it's a genuine laughter at the absolute absurdity of all of us making these claims that sound like we actually know something. And the laughter is also a very serious method that tries, without thinking that I myself or any of us are innocent of the very things we're criticizing, a kind of an invitation to somehow join with each other in something better than what we've already done. And I think that the exploration of the vice grip of the fantasy of being modern, which Bruno was an early thinker. This is not turning into an English sentence. Bruno thought early and deep about that. But I really felt that his citation was indicated a kind of brain damage. If that makes any sense. So, I think Bruno took it in that kind of angry, friendly vein, which, and we have remained very, if anything, ever deepening friends. But this has been a tussle for decades, this particular issue.
Okay. Basically, I wanted to ask you about your talk from that year, which was described as a star performance. And when you really, you took the STIS world by storm. And did you think at the time that you were making a serious field disrupting intervention?
Well, of course not. And I still find it hard to get my mind wrapped around that. Although I do know now, and I knew a little bit then, that when I speak in public performance, there's a kind of charismatic performance that goes on that sweeps people into some kind of shared emotional and intellectual experience. And I don't know exactly how it happens, but I think as we get older, we each kind of learn what our gifts and weaknesses are. And I knew that was how I worked even then. And I was happy to use it best I could. And I thought, and still that particular in that period, Adele Clark and Lee Starr, and Evelyn Hammonds and me and Sandra Harding, I particularly in that period, and Lucy Suchman, my God, that we were a we. In some profound sense, we were coming into a power that we had created for each other and sustained for each other. And it's not that in some way we were in profound opposition to the men in our field. We weren't. But that there was a kind of intersectional feminist power going on that I felt like several of us were performing by the mid-90s and bringing people with us.
And so one of the few terms that I will steal from the software industry is disruption. And part of what made that moment so important and so powerful and memorable is that it was a moment of disruption where you were able to challenge big ideas and that were widely accepted at the time and widely kind of championed and not questioned. And so what current mainstream or mainstream STS ideas should we be challenging right now?
Well, I know, I mean, that's kind of, Anna Tsing is my close friend, anthropologist, mushrooms at the end of the world, the title to die for. Anyway, Anna and I were doing a joint gig recently, and we joked with you know something about something, and you put it out there for a public, and then you get about other things, nothing whatsoever about, and you have to pretend like you do. So I feel a little bit like that. That said, I have lots of opinions on this question, and I think that we live in very scary times, profoundly scary times of a kind of resurgent, racist, misogynist, nationalist, murderous world in which the forced migrations of so many human beings, they're almost uncountable, and the forced migrations of the more than human as well, the forced homelessness, the forced destruction of pathways and corridors and welcome, the forced destruction of refuge, and that there's never been a time more urgent for seriously, historically, different, trying to understand other times of forced migration and genocide and the role of the sciences in that, the ongoing role of the sciences in militarism, but that's my fundamental focus here. I think it's very important to try to understand what we've inherited, we meaning Earthlings, and what is unprecedented. And that science studies, along with just about everybody else, I think every serious person, certainly every serious scholar, needs to be paying serious attention. Again, going back to Bruno, his Landing on Earth, that most recent book of his, most recent one I've read since we started my engagement with him, is his ferocity and urgency around the dilemma of massive formations of people and powers and practices are an active denial of what it would take to actually share this earth in some way that is for flourishing and ongoingness. I'm avoiding the word sustainability because it's so contaminated, but it's not a bad word. This kind of ongoingness committed to sharing this earth there are astonishing forces arrayed in active denial. And we three all live in Trumplandia right now. And so we wake up this morning to, an offer to buy Greenland so as to exploit it for fossil fuels and uranium, to a removal of the rule that limited the incarceration of migrant children, to a dismantling of yet one more endangered, conservation measure, on and on. We wake up on a daily basis, and I have deep friends, really, really close friends and former students in Brazil who write me about Bolsonaro, and we look at Turkey, and Hungary, and for that matter, on and on we go. I just got back from Colombia, where my colleagues and friends are in still hope, but deeper and deeper worry that the hard-won, flawed, but real peace agreement with the FARC that muted the paramilitaries for a time is unraveling. It's heightened danger. And I think science studies has a great deal to offer, including thinking hard about what constitutes corridors for people and African people, both how to what we've got, but also design and build, think, and develop practices with each other. And science studies scholars, as a group, are awfully good at knowing to strive, theorize, work with, offer an understanding of practices, both old and new. So I think we should just get on with it.
And I think this is a really great place to ask you the next question, with understanding that science studies has a place, an emergent place in the global order of knowledge making and knowledge-based practices. In 2016, you published your two most recent books, Manifestly Haraway and Staying with the Trouble. And in them, you refer to this moment that we're in as part of various scenes, so the capital scene, the Cthulhu scene, etc., where others have used the term Anthropocene. Would you say that you're calling for a complete turn away from the Anthropocene discourse, or are you somebody who is adding to it or challenging it?
I thought a lot about that. I wish the term had never been invented, but it was. And it has been adopted by many communities of practice. It does a huge amount of work. I think it would be foolish to pretend that a person situated such as I am could operate without that term. And I'm always a both-and kind of girl. I want the litter to get bigger rather than produce a kind of prohibition against something and kick it out of the litter. And I'm interested in putting my industry out other ways of thinking of the dense time space we're in, would kind of a thick present, not an instantaneous, a present of indefinite boundaries. That kind of clearly, if I had to choose between Anthropocene and Capitalocene, I would choose Capitalocene, because I think it makes very clear we're talking about a world system that was invented about 500 years ago. It's a horrible cartoon version, but it's not all the time everywhere, and it's not all of the people swept into capitalist practices and modes of value creation, value extraction. That a serious understanding of the capitalist scene and the way that Jason Moore does is absolutely necessary. And then Anna and I and colleagues in Denmark thought we had invented the term plantation scene, but I know subsequently, and I know because African American feminists who pointed out ferociously that how dare we use that term without bringing Joaquin Spillers and Sylvia Wynter back into the conversation, that we alluded to slave, anyway. I think I'm more guilty about this than Anna. Alluded to slave gardens because I knew they were very important, but I didn't cite the named scholarship of the folks who had done the work. That the plantation scene is true somehow. That is, because of the word, but the conceptual understanding of the absolute fundamental, earth-changing worlding of particularly the Atlantic-based slave trade and all that it brought with it. Can't be named in the list of forced labor and substitution of displaced plants and broken ties of generations. See, I think what characterizes the Plantationocene is the breaking of the care of generations. That what both human beings and other than human beings are robbed of is the capacity to take care of their children. The breaking of generations so as to force them into systems of reproduction rather than generativity. And production are apparatuses for the creation and extraction of value. And the Plantationocene was a full invention. So, for example, you guys probably also read the amazing 5-part series in the New York Times last week, or the last couple of weeks. 1990. The implication of hereditary forced African slavery into the English colonies. There was a presentation which was really important, and I wish it could be required reading for everybody. From a science studies perspective, what this piece was doing was explicating, showing how many critical technologies, the so-called modernity, were invented and practiced and consolidated and standardized in the period of Caribbean slavery, Brazilian, Caribbean, Florida, in the period of slavery in that world, double entry bookkeeping, the hierarchies of rewards and punishment in labor, the particular kinds of relocation of labor so as to never home, but escape and find family, the breaking of him. Anyway, I think working with the plantation is really important. And there's a way in which the Anthropocene and the Capitalocene, though they kind of acknowledge it, run roughshod over it, and also don't emphasize the absolutely contemporary issues of plantations. Now, certainly, I mean, obviously, the oil kinds of deforestation and then supposed reforestation, even with carbon budget credits with plantations, the devastations of human beings and living. So that I'm from anything that's what I call. So Cthulhu from Sonic, again, Greekish, not from Cthulhu of Lovecraft, but from an evocation of the earth, tentacular ones, the critters of the earth. The Cthulhu is not over, and it's not safe, it's not innocent, but it's also not, there's a way in which Plantationocene, Capitalocene are the times of critique. And the Cthulhu is a time of being embraced by the ongoing generativity of things. All of these words make a hash out of what I would call a serious ethnographic sensibility. I think we talked about this at the conference in Santa Cruz a little bit. For example, climate change as a concept, and certainly Anthropocene as a concept, is a southern importation, more or less hostile, certainly suspect, in the circumpolar north, who have perfectly good idioms, languages, conceptual apparatuses, historical reflection for dealing with changes in refraction of stars, changes in the sea ice, the changes in weather, organized around the concept of Scylla or breath, translated that way. These translations don't quite work. What would it take for the Southerners, Canadians, United Statesers, and the Northerners to form serious contact zones with their conceptual apparatuses in a way that really led all this to and identify who is in most trouble, human and non-human. So all of those groups don't even begin to suggest indigenous and more than indigenous.
Okay.
You guys have switched orientations. Right.
Yes, you have to.
But you didn't actually switch because you're in different places. Oh, well, never mind.
So I will be presenting up for us for the first time this year, and for us is also creating better avenues for undergraduate participants to present their work. And so do you have any advice for us first-timers who may still be working out the kinks in our presentations?
Oh, well, first of all, what are you presenting on? I was curious what your work is.
Sure. I'm presenting on work that I did actually in my master's, which is a slightly different topic of what I'm working on now. But the presentation is called Race, Modernity, and Hospitality, and it's a play on hospital and hospitality. And I studied international clinical volunteerism in Tanzania.
Where?
Sorry?
Where? International volunteers.
Oh, in Tanzania.
In Tanzania.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, really interesting. And Adita, are you presenting this time too?
Yeah, but this is an early dissertation draft, early dissertation chapter draft, and it's going to be about modes of attention and boundaries of ecosystems when it comes to wildfires.
Are you paying particular attention to wildfires in like Alaska, California, Indonesia? Where are you?
I'm currently based out of Toronto, but I did much of my field work in California, which is why I was in Santa Cruz.
Did you do any field work last summer?
Not last summer. I actually did all of my field work this year. So I've been thinking about fires both in ecosystems, but outside of ecosystems, and the discrepancy of attention and the modes of attention through which they are filtered and brought forth into the public imagination. And that's one of the things that I'm thinking about, but also modes of attention that is entrained when it comes to fire ecologists, when they pay attention to the earth and sort of forensic ways that they reproduce fires. Yeah.
Well, I don't exactly have any advice. It's more like my own experience was when I just leapt into what I really cared about and just did it. It worked because I made it a point. And if I didn't care, life is too short. And if it's too short, that finding those points of ongoingness, generativity, for each other, and forgetting about saying whether it's part of a master's or a dissertation or what have you. Who cares? Rather leap right into the stuff, because that's what matters. I'm really passionate about the questions around hospitality that affect international volunteers in health type situations, particularly in East Africa, or wildfires that have been burning across so much of the world, most certainly practically all of North America. That road from California to Yellowstone and then down to Zion, or not Zion, Grand Tetons. There wasn't a single minute that. And then remembering the history of firing this land that I'm on right this exact minute, when the Amamudsen were doing controlled burns and the whole thing. Fire. I think of Born in Flames too. That really film back from. My mind is blanking on the name of the filmmaker, but you probably could put it anyway. Born in Flames. So my only advice is for you and perhaps everybody else is not to tell people where you are professionally, particularly unless they ask, or what this is part of or was part of, but the questions that interest me in this situation are. And go for it. And this also goes back a little bit to the Thulucine question from before. I continue to take seriously that little piece I wrote in both Friendship and Some Friction with Sandra Parker, that situating what we know so as to be accountable and responsible. And then another kind of little add-on is that actually the last book I wrote was the alliance with Adele Clark and Michelle Murphy and Kim Tallbear and Ruha Benjamin, and Qiling Wu, and Yuling Huang. And I had this awful feeling I'm leaving someone out, called Making Kin, Not Population, which grew out of a 4S presentation, where collectively and from very, very different points of view and some real disagreement in our group, really important friction in our group, we felt that we just had to raise again, outside Malthusian parameters, the question of human numbers, distribution, unequal extractions, that we had to learn to do it in an anti-racist, a non-misogynist, non-Malthusian way, because if not us, then who? So I feel that way about a lot of our work. If not us, then who? If you're not going to do it, who will?
Yeah, I guess in this context, and this touches on pretty much everything we've talked about so far. What do you see as the future of STS, specifically feminist STS? And do you see it as contained in the academic world or going beyond it? And how does this 4S conference and how can 4S as a society in general shape this future?
Well, it's never been contained by the academic world, but the academic world is a very important, I have never been one to diss scholarship and teaching and research and the space that universities make and the reclaiming of public universities and the holding them to account, especially so-called private ones too, but which also are heavily subsidized, but that's another set of issues. I feel that university-based scholarship and teaching and mentorship and camaraderie remain really important. And intercultural feminist science studies has never been restricted to that space. Quite the opposite. It's always been highly permeable. And many of us have felt that our largest job was to make available the resources of the university to groups with fewer resources. Not all of us feel that way, nor do we have to, but to be in connection with the kinds of knowledge making and action in other communities of practice, be they policy or water defenders or international volunteers, or that being in having attachment site with other communities of practice really matters. And I think science studies as a whole has been pretty good at that. And I think feminist science in particular has been especially good at it. And we'll continue. And I have an origin story about science studies, not just feminist science studies. It's not the Edinburgh School and the whatever. It's in activities like science, activity against chemical and biological warfare, and the Boston Women's Health Collective. Those are my origins as a science studies scholar. And that way predated the official, the really important scholarly work, for example, by Steve Chapin and other really, really wonderful men and scholars. It's not dissing it at all. I have a pretty strong sense about studies also in many. By the way, there's one other little piece of that. And that goes back to your question earlier about, do I, as a 75-year-old lady, have any advice? And that is, hold on to your peers, the writing groups, the ways you mentor each other. Hold on to your cohort. And those colleagueships and friendships, even if they get really quite difficult, don't let them dissolve into antagonisms or indifference. Those important kinds of sustenance in the next years is going to come from your cohort. Your mentors are well and great, and if you're lucky, really good mentors, but the folks who really are going to matter the most are your cohort. That's a great place to hook up.
Thank you so much. This was a great conversation, and I think is going to be very helpful for new and old 4Sers, or returning 4Sers, in the future and in light of this conference. And so thank you so much for sitting with us. And yeah.
And while you're in New Orleans, be sure to say hello to Tanya Perez and Lucy Suchman for me, and others too. But I'm not going to get to be there, and I'm missing all my friends.
Well, we will miss you at the conference, but thank you for kind of phoning in for us.
And thank you for the interview.
Thank you for your time.
Bye.